My name is Natalie Gorup. I'm a senior French and English major with a philosophy minor. And for my project today, I chose to include and expand upon a collection of poems that I initially wrote for my English senior thesis. I did this under the skillful advising of my mentor, Professor Susan Eisenberg. For the expansion of my honors project, I was directed by Dr. Michael Brown. He both inspired and directed my project by challenging me to integrate my poetry with my studies in philosophy. This expansion that I talk about is a second essay that I wrote. For my first collection of poetry, I wrote an essay that analyzed how I conceive of poetry and how my poetic process takes shape. And then this second essay that I wrote for my honors project kind of takes a step back and analyzes both how I do my poetry and just poetry in general in relation to philosophy. 4 years ago, I applied to join Creighton University's honors program after having read a description of its community members as fellow seekers of truth. My search for truth had already brought me to write and study poetry, but it was my search for truth in philosophy that challenged me to define what it is I do, express, and seek when I write. I first encountered the ancient quarrel over truth between poetry and philosophy as a personal quarrel, since these disciplines were both tied up in my identity. An epistemology seminar introduced me to the quarrel by questioning whether poetry had anything meaningful to say, anything that could reference or touch truth in some manner. According to one standard philosophical view, truth claims have the form of a proposition which can only be either true or false. This is rather problematic for poets who like to make statements like "your eyes are stars," seem to be both true and not true. And so the challenge for the poet is to then show how figurative language either is a proposition or treats truth in some way that isn't propositional. In order to do so, I studied the heart of the quarrel, which can be recast as the tension between reason and the emotions. I studied Plato's and Aristotle's descriptions of poetry, in addition to Martha Nussbaum's account of how emotion relates to truth. In short, I'll give you kind of the SparkNotes version, as Mary Kate did earlier. Plato conceives of poetry as mimesis, or imitation of the real, in a way that a painter might copy the image or subject. This is also the crux of Plato's problem with the poet, because he believes the poet doesn't have direct access to the universals, such as the god. He criticizes Homer a lot for his portrayal of the gods as changing and evil. He fears the distortion of truth that comes with distance from it. Aristotle, meanwhile, focuses on the making of poiesis. Aristotle speaks of the poet in a three-dimensional sense, as a builder of a structure, and suggests that poetry is at least quasi-philosophical because it treats the universals of the future, while history treats the particulars of the past. These universals are the ideal figures or lofty goals towards which we strive. He says that poetry builds formal structures up towards these ideals. Although I originally expected myself to agree more and have more in common with Aristotle, because at least he doesn't throw the poets out of his ideal city like Plato does in the Republic, I found that Aristotle actually feared poetry less because he appreciated its power less, and ended up placing myself more in line with Plato. The fact that Plato fears poetry enough to ban it from his city shows that he understands it could obscure truth because it can promulgate false propositions. It takes propositions as its object. Plato, the philosopher-poet, fears poetry precisely because it shares its object with philosophy. He thinks it does not treat this object appropriately. So now I had established that there was some connection between poetry and propositions, that it could in some way relate to truth. And then I had to turn to Martha Nussbaum to help clarify just what this relationship was. She returned me to the reasons and emotions dichotomy. Nussbaum holds a neo-Stoic view of emotions as cognitive evaluative judgments, as value-laden beliefs that share several features relevant to understanding poetry as a kind of emotional knowing. She explains that the object of emotions is a way of seeing. It is a belief concerned with a value connected to one's own personal flourishing. It therefore localizes its object within one's life. Now that sounds kind of, I guess, wordy and philosophical, but I came to interpret it according to applying it to poetry in a way that made poetry the link between the universal and the particular. Poetry then fills truth out by making connections to it that help us to grasp its significance, connections that a further set of propositions couldn't give us. My connection with particulars is the only reason that I care about universals, the only reason universals mean anything to me. Very simply, we care about what touches us, and we are forced to react to what touches us. We must integrate, synthesize, or disentangle propositions that touch the belief systems that shape ourselves, define our values, and motivate our actions. Poetry ensures that I am caught up with the truth, just as I try to catch it in my particular experiences. This means that poetry is powerful, because false propositions that relate to us are more dangerous than those that remain distant to us. For this reason, poetry, like philosophy, must be practiced with care that concerns truth. This Plato got. Whether or not Plato should be in charge of censoring poetry is left to be explored. But what can be concluded is that the approach of the poet and philosopher to one another should not be one of defensiveness. The quarrel that they are involved in is true to the word's etymology, which is the kind of quarrel that sometimes takes place between lovers or between a mother and child. The quarrelers are bound in a way that makes their arguing safe. Their relationship is not endangered or even threatened by their argument. In the case of the poet and the philosopher committed to truth, their quarreling will only lead to greater clarity and appreciation of truth. Now, I spoke of being caught up with the truth through poetry. This concept is the link to my first essay that explains my own poetic process. I entitled it Catching. I did so because most of my poems begin with the moments that seem to catch in my life. The moments that I realize, even at the time, are pregnant with further meaning and significance, but which the act of engaging bars from immediate analysis. Therefore, most of my poems are flagged moments in my life. They are thoughts, images, or emotions that I mark as a kind of note to self, there is more here, come back later. Most of my poems literally begin as a line scribbled on a sticky note, or maybe the palm of my hand if there's no paper around, to be saved for later exploration. I carry them with me and ruminate on them at the fringes of my experience, so that waiting in line or walking to class become moments of meditation. But instead of becoming just a pause to experience, picking up these catching moments later then becomes an extension and a deepening of that experience. It is poetry as retreat from the breadth of farther experience and as invasion into the depths of further experience. In summary, my poetry is at once finding catching moments, attempting to catch moments, and being caught up with them. That's the essay portion of my presentation. I'd like to share with you a few poems now, since we've talked so much about poetry. I'll give a little bit of an introduction just to give you a setting for them. And I didn't mention this in this talk, but in my first essay I did, that the things that seem to catch me are often the conflicts in my life, or the things that trouble me, the things that I need to think through more and, I guess, find the truth of, appreciate that significance. So this first one is called Market Day in Dajabon. It was inspired by a visit to the market town of Dajabon, which I saw during a summer study abroad program led by Creighton professors Tom Kelly and Kyle Woolley. This town lies on the Massacre River that divides the Haitian and Dominican border, and was the site of the Parsley Massacre of 20,000 to 30,000 Haitians under Trujillo in 1937. Today, Dajabon is the site of a major market exchange between Dominicans and Haitians that takes place every Monday and Friday. The Haitians bring in mostly manufactured or donated goods, it's about all they have, and the Dominicans bring perishable items and produce, usually what they can't sell elsewhere. Market Day in Dajabon. The butcher's boy pulls limp cow skin that stretches and hangs from damp burlap. skin like the wet laundry Haitian women slap into a rusted river's runoff, with red flakes that stick to slick, gleaming calves. He tosses it out of the truck and into the dust of a Monday market scramble. Scramble like the fire ants that scuttle from the mound I've smashed with my canvas sneaker, scuttle and scavenge and sting the soft flesh of my white ankle. The only meat for sale. A hoof next, maybe an ear. One woman at the back of the swarm, jaw set, lifts 50 times her weight with the grim upturned corners of clamped lips, bloody pig head balanced atop her plates of cornrows. This next poem is a sonnet. One of the things I learned in my time in the creative writing program here is that you have to learn the conventional and classical ways before you get to have fun and I guess improvise a little bit more, and I've been very grateful for that. This sonnet was inspired by years of observing a family member's reaction to the death of his mother. I hope it tells the story for itself, but it does reference one mythological character that I'll explain because we aren't all next to Wikipedia to go look it up. I reference Argus, the ever-watchful creature with 100 eyes, whom Hera charged with the task of guarding one of Zeus's mistresses from him. But of course, Zeus eventually succeeded in having Argus killed to get to his mistress, and afterwards Hera put all of Argus's eyes onto the tail feathers of the peacock in his memory. This is called A Bachelor's Bequest. I moved into your house on Bancroft Street, refused to dust, take down the broken clock. Slept under shrouds of the embroidered sheets you stitched 3 days before I learned to talk. I cracked black walnuts from your backyard tree, left sooty shell beneath my untrimmed nails, while kneading sweetbread dough with piety, povitica, Croatian Holy Grail. I decked your desk with grainy photographs, sepia relics to adorn your shrine, observed by eyes of Argus you amassed in prism-glinting vases on all sides. Bruised vigil of 100 eyes, unburied, mourns me alone, your only son, unmarried. On a little bit different note, this next poem was actually inspired by someone who's in the room with us today. It's inspired by my mother, who's inspired much more than just my poetry, and came out of a summer of landscaping and yard work with her that helped me to appreciate her and also show me how much I wanted to be like her. This is called I Smell Like My Mother. I smell like sweat and diesel fuel from the tractor. I smell like cold hose water, liquid metal summer sprays of laughter and carcinogens. I smell like fresh earth and lily of the valley perfume used to cover it up when my watch ticks that showering before dinner is out of the question. I smell like chives and parsley, clipped from a caterpillar-chewed plot where I tell you butterflies first swallowed their piquant colors. I smell like vanilla and warm milk heated to soothe puffy eyes and crumpled jumpers. I smell like love and laundry hung to dry and flap in the wind every Tuesday and Thursday. And I'll conclude with one final poem. This is a little bit more esoteric than the others, but very brief. It's an attempt to capture that one of my favorite moments of the day, which is parting the curtains in the morning. First light. Morning cleaves through bent blinds, wedges weary eyes open. Aurora slits thick slanted shadows to reach stubborn sleepers. Dawn breaks the water of swollen dreams. Thank you.